Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This show is brought to you by Flatirons Tuning, your source for any aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts. Be sure to check out our store at flatironstuning.com and stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning. Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This is episode number 84, and we got Scotty in the shop, and we've got another special guest joining us. We've got Mr. Tim Hardy from Tim Hardy Racing. Now, Tim, I think probably as long as we've been running Pikes Peak, you've been running Pikes Peak. You might even have been running it a few years before us. And so we've always kind of seen you like on the hill. You've been at Fan Fest with this E30 BMW that has just been kind of constantly being refined, improved, changed, modified, and finally had the opportunity to bring you on and talk to you about it. And maybe just as a start, can you tell us like what is it about the Pikes Peak hill climb? How did you get into driving? Like what was the catalyst to get this ball rolling as it was?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of a lot to it. I started rallycrossing back in high school with a buddy, actually a couple buddies, and we were running like 3 or 4 people to a car, which they would never let you do that nowadays. But that kind of all got us hooked on racing, and I eventually kind of got my dad involved, and that's kind of what jump started the whole thing off. Rallycross is just through the SCCA is just a super cheap way to get going. The races
Sure.
were like $30 back in the day, so, or maybe even less.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a shared dream between my dad, and then he's always wanted to run the peak. I've gone up there as a kid. I grew up in Colorado Springs, so I knew what Pikes Peak was about. And in the back of your head, oh yeah, I'd love to do it. You don't really think it's a possibility, but I think for me what it was is in 2011, my buddy Pat told me, he's like, yeah, I signed up for Pikes Peak. I'm going to run my Neon. And I was like, shit, if he's going to do that, I should try to do that and see if I can, find a way to make it happen. And so I went through a bunch of random ideas in my head of what cars to choose from. And I narrowed it down to either a 240 SX or a BMW E30, and found an E30 first. And that's what I went for. And probably there could have been a million other cars that I could have chosen that would have been a lot easier to start with. Like even an E36 would have made life a lot more simplistic.
Okay. Was that the last year? 2011 was the first year it was fully paved?
Yeah. So 2012 was the first year I ran it, and that was the first year it was fully paved. I wish now I for sure would have been able to do just like that little snippet of dirt just to say that I did a little bit of dirt, but it didn't work out with timing. I think in 2011, I think I was 23. So it was a struggle to like, that's part of why I got a car in Craigslist that was cheap, is because I didn't have a huge budget. I was working, as many hours as I could and doing as many jobs as I could just to basically get like a car ready for Pikes Peak. And, kind of worked out the first year. So.
Well, and you said you were rallycrossing before that. I mean, rear-wheel drive car, all-wheel drive car?
Yeah, so we did a bunch of different things. Okay. The first thing we started out with was a rear-wheel drive car. It was a Volvo 740 that we got this was before Craigslist. It was on the Thrifty Nickel, it was called.
Okay.
Yep. $200, I think it was. And it had like my buddy Greg and we went down to Fountain, Colorado, and it had like a really bad rear main seal leak, and just went to go pick it up, and we drove it home, and it was probably a really bad decision driving it home, because I'm sure it was like quarts and quarts and quarts by the time we got home.
Wow.
But we fixed it up, and we ran it in I think the stock class for a couple races, and then being teenagers, we're like, we're going to go into mod. For whatever reason, we decided to just completely strip it out. We put Lexan windows in it, like cut off the exhaust. It was still super, super, super slow, but it looked a little bit cooler. I guess we like painted it like Rust-Oleum and had like stripes and stuff down. It was a fun car. And then that thing eventually got rolled by, I think it was Greg who was driving at the time. I wasn't even there when it happened, but that basically ruined that car. And we started my dad and I, we were both doing it at the time, and we went to a front wheel drive, like Ford Escort. That was actually surprisingly quick. And I ended up winning nationals, I think 1 or 2 years. And I think, I haven't looked it up in a while, but I think for Rallycross, I think I'm still the youngest guy to win it. And it's getting more and more popular. So it might be, that might stand for a little while. I think it was 18 or 19 when I won it.
Wow.
So it was a while ago.
In a Ford Escort.
In a Ford Escort, yeah.
Okay.
So it was a Ford Escort GT. So it's a 1991. It's a fun little car. I mean, it's basically a Mazda. That's the version that had a Mazda engine, the 1.8 BP.
Okay.
And it did well. It was fairly light, so it didn't have like a limited slip or anything, but it, for the tight courses, it did just fine.
Yeah.
And then I guess in between that, there were a couple other cars. We had a Mazda 323 GTX, which was that was when both my dad and I were starting to learn how to like modify cars, like after the Volvo, and just made all kinds of mistakes and blew things up and didn't do things correctly. There's a lot of trial and error. Like there was one particular thing where I don't know if it was my idea or what, but we decided to try to use PVC for the like intake charge pipes, and they just kept blowing off, which obviously makes sense. And then we would just start tightening it, and then the pipe just got from whatever it was, a 2.5 inch, and it just kept getting smaller and smaller, and smaller and smaller because it was just melting.
Yep.
Yeah, that was a lot of stupid lessons learned on those cars. But
well, I mean, you got to learn.
Yeah, very good place to learn for sure. Yeah.
Well, and it sounds like when you started doing this, you were doing a lot of the mechanical stuff yourself. So you guys, as soon as you started playing with cars, racing cars, you also started working and developing, your skills as a mechanic and that sort of thing.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then rallycross, driving in dirt. I mean, driving in dirt, certainly see the appeal to Pikes Peak until they started to pave it. Did you do anything on tarmac before you started running up the peak?
Yeah, so there are other races that I did, and it was similar to there's series that still exist, like the 24-hour lemons and things like that. There was a series called Leadfoot Rally, which it wasn't actually. There was some of it was on dirt, but they had like 6 or 7 events, and they had regular oval track. They had like road racing at PMP. They had like precision driving. They had like all these different facets. And that's kind of where I really got a first taste of like actually being on a track and driving a car on pavement. Totally wrong setup, like not having correct tires and just like, not knowing that we should align the car, not knowing to check tire pressures, just any of that stuff, like orientation in the car. And so it was just, that was how a lot of the guys were. So you just, everybody was pretty much mid-pack. And then there were like a couple guys that knew what they were doing, and they were like way ahead of everybody else. And you're like, what is going on? Like, how are they so much faster? But so that probably helped a little bit getting accepted that year. But back then it was definitely, in 2012, it was definitely a lot easier to get accepted compared to now. So, I mean, I think it still helped having that in the background, and using those guys that ran the event as like the whatever they call when you need a like
reference.
Reference, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Well, and so once it sounds like the car literally found you, and then you just started running up Pikes Peak. I mean, that first year, because if you bought this car off Craigslist, you had to turn it into a race car. So I would guess that did the majority of your time and energy get spent just literally just putting in the safety gear, putting in the cage, getting it ready to run?
Yeah. I mean, it was a monster challenge. Not only and this happens every year, but it's a time versus money thing for me, because it's, you can spend all your money and pay somebody else to do it, but then you won't be able to get as much done. And then vice versa. You do all the work, you don't have the time, and you can't make as much money. So it's definitely a battle of choosing what you do and how crazy you go. But the first year was kind of just mostly to just get a car together. And I had some goals lined up about what I wanted to do. I wanted to make sure it was turbocharged, just because of the power aspect up there. and then work on safety first. So I designed the cage and I built the cage. It took me like probably a month and a half or closer to 2 months, because it's the first thing I've ever done that was that complicated. And I just made sure that I got the fitment of the cage as close as I could, so there weren't any gaps. And then I went through the rule books like 500 times, and then I took rule books from FIA and then just anything in the SCCA, and I tried to make like a something that would work for everybody, so it would work down the line and make it safer than it needed to be. We made sure that the pipe was like, I think our car calls for a 1.5 inch like 095 minimum, so we bumped up to 1 3/4 095, just so it's a little bit stronger and a little bit beefier. And then I knew that I wanted to get a co-driver the first year, but I couldn't really find anybody. And I said, I'm going to still make it so it's, like the FIA style. So there's still crosses on each side, just for the safety sake of it. Because a lot of the road racing cage, it's all noted up just on, above the driver's head, and then the passenger side is just kind of whatever. So,
right. Nobody's sitting there.
Yeah.
You don't need as much bracing, but there's safety benefits, rigidity benefits to a little bit of a weight penalty, but sure.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I did everything possible on the car. And it was a huge learning curve. Because I had from rallycross and a few other things, I had, a fairly good idea of how to fabricate, but like, I really don't think I actually sat down and like learned how to like MIG properly, and like just all the things that go into fabricating that you take for granted until you sit there and you're trying to do it. Like, and then I was super cheap with things. So like, I wanted to make dimple dies, but I didn't want to spend money to get a dimple die set. So I figured out how to do it with like a 3/4 inch socket, and then like a 3/4 inch extension, and then like this jig I made. It's just all these like weird things, and it's still what's on the car today, and nobody knows that until you like I posted on the forum, and a couple of people said things about it, but a lot of the information just came from online. So it was like, you'd spend 12 or 14-hour days working on the car, and then in between that, or at night, I'd be searching on the forums trying to see like what other people did, or get examples, or just try to figure out and read through the lines of there's so much misinformation out there online, and
sure,
like, what is correct, what isn't correct, and then you're trying to make the best decision while you're building the thing. And I mean, it worked out. The one thing that really helped both my buddy Pat and I with the Neon, which is very unfortunate, but the Waldo Canyon fire was that year, and so they ended up delaying the race by I think they delayed it till August.
It was like 2 or 3 months.
And that was like a huge saving grace. Like, my car was ready, but it had 0 aero, and like, it probably would have been a much worse year. I'm sure that screwed other people, but for me, it was like fantastic to have this, and even better for Pat, because like, he didn't even have his wiring together. The car hadn't started. Like,
oh wow,
everybody seems to go crazy on Pikes Peak, and it always, inevitably, you're doing way too much at the last minute from procrastination or whatever. But his scenario was like greatly helped by that fire. So
wild,
as tragic as that was.
Well, and I mean, I think it's always been this way, where you can register for Pikes Peak, find out if you're in, like, I want to say it's the first week of January or last week of December, something like that. So like right at the very end of the year, very beginning of the next year is when and then it's, I think at that time it was the first Sunday in July, then they moved it up a week at some point there. But so like, did you not start prepping the car until you got in, or did you start prepping the car and then apply?
No, so I started working on the car basically right after I bought it. And it started out a little bit slow, but I bought it in, I believe it was August of 2011.
Okay.
With the intention of doing the race. And so they don't let you register until November.
Yeah.
And like you said, I had no idea if I was going to get in. I was just like fully, like, the way I approached it is anything I could do to, that was time intensive, or something that it didn't cost a whole lot, I would try to do all of that work. So I pulled the engine. I, spent time trying to sell the stock engine that was in there and just, make as much money as possible in that time frame, and also do all the hard work of like stripping the stuff down. I put the car in a rotisserie that I built with 2 Harbor Freight jacks.
Engine stands.
Yeah. Oh,
that's the best rotisserie out there. Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was awesome. And like, I didn't really properly measure it. And so the first time I started turning it over, it was like within like half an inch from hitting on the ground. And I was there by myself trying to get
Oh, no.
So by the time it started going over, it was just like, it's either going to totally freak the car up. And this was after building the cage. So I was like,
oh my
really
gosh,
worried about it, but it cleared, and got it on the rotisserie, pulled all like, I went crazy for all the weight reduction. That's why I had it on the rotisserie, so I could get to the undercoating to strip the undercoating off the car a little bit easier to save that 25 pounds or whatever it was. So it was, there was a lot of work done for sure ahead of knowing that both of us were actually in the race. And it was just kind of like a huge sigh of relief that we both made it in. And I think that was the year that Pikes Peak realized that they accepted way too many people, like way too many people. I think it was 100 cars and 100 bikes is what they initially accepted. And
wow,
there were a lot of problems that year. Like Paul Dellenbach throttles got stuck and he went straight off. And then there was,
wasn't that the year where there was the crazy hail at the top?
Yeah, there was all kinds of stuff that happened. I mean, there was like my buddy Pat didn't qualify all that well, and he ended up getting like most of the way up. And like, there's a pretty good picture of him with like, it's like 3/4 inch at least of hail on the ground. And he's on who's A6s at the time, just, the closest things you get to a slick, and just plowing through it and probably going 4 miles an hour. But, he made it to the top. So I thought I had it bad just going through a little bit of rain, but you never know what you're going to hit up there, especially the later you go in the day. You just, on those thunderstorm afternoons, you have you're going to face. So,
man. Yeah. Well, and you said that you decided right from the word go that you're going to turbocharge the car. So you're putting the cage in the car. You're taking all the weight out of it.
Yeah.
And then, so what engine did you decide to put in there and turbocharge?
Yeah. So that was one of the harder decisions of the whole thing. And that's where a lot of the forum stuff came about, because, the requirements were, I just wanted something that was like probably good enough for like 500 horsepower. On the stock side, I didn't have money to do any forged internals or any of that jazz. And the best bang for the buck, and I still think for the BMW side of things, as far as like right now, if I wanted to go get a backup motor and, start building it, it's the same scenario that we started with. And that's the same thing I'm running now. It's an M52 motor. And so the 2.8 liter out of a 328i, and, all this information was available online. And really back then, all I had to do was, I think we ran gas that first year. So we just ran a thicker head gasket and, ARP studs, and I think we might've done some more ARP rod hardware, or it's hard to remember that far back how much I did. I know it was
a little while ago.
Yeah, I know a lot of stock in the motor, and I think we were at about 14 psi, and with lower compression, and that was plenty of power. For what we were trying to do. It would be crawling if I drove that car, I'm sure, to what I'm used to now. But it made a good amount of power, and I got lucky too. I found before I really knew that I was going to go turbocharged, I found a fairly inexpensive lower mile S50 motor out of an M3. And so I actually used the head off that because it was lower miles, and there were problems with, I think it was the M50, or I can't remember what generation, but there's valve train problems with some of the stock motor, and that had already been addressed in that head. So I just used that head and slapped it on the M52 with that thicker head gasket. And that's still the same head that I'm running now. It's been gone through the cams, or the same cams I'm running this whole time. So that motor has been a very good purchase.
For sure. I mean, that's how many times have you run that up to peak then? 11?
It would be, well, I took off a couple. That would be the time.
Okay.
Yeah. I took off 2015 and then COVID 2020. So
Right.
I
Okay.
wish I'd done it the whole time, but yeah.
2 years in out of 11 to miss is not that bad.
Yeah.
You're still doing okay.
Yeah.
Well, and did you know what you were getting into for race week with Pikes Peak?
No, I had kind of an idea, but it really didn't hit home until, probably went through like the rookie orientation. And I remember going into there and like, the rookie meetings now are probably like 10 guys in the room. When we went there, it was like a regular driver's meeting and it was all rookies. So, and, Lane Schrantz was giving us like the 411 on what was going on. And, you have an idea, but they throw a lot of information out at you. And I remember just, not being fully prepared, not having enough crew, relying on people that same thing. They didn't really know what it was about. And, we learned a lot in that first year, in those first couple of years, about like what not to do and what things to have ready and like how much coffee you need and just all the little,
all the coffee
like really important to have that you don't really think about. And, I'm sure there's stuff we still miss, but
Well, and obviously you've done it multiple times, so it was a good enough experience that you decided to do it again the following year.
Yeah.
And at this point, would you say that it's just you've got the bug? It is just something that you like as soon as the race is over, you're starting to think about next year?
Yeah. It's a little bit of like a love-hate relationship, because that's just like it's an overwhelming process for me to get like this year was, an example of like it almost killing me before the race even starts, because it was just like 2 months straight. I took off 2 months of work, and then prior to that, it was like every free moment I had, I was down in the Springs working on the car. And there were definitely moments where I'm like, God, why am I doing this still? Like, I've proved what I can do, blah blah blah. And it was definitely like you just have to push through some of those moments of like, the dread, because it's all going to be worth it once you get it all figured out and ready to go.
Following you on Instagram for the few months before Pikes Peak this year, you could feel the stress. It was thick.
Oh yeah.
It was thick in those posts. But
so you've got, because it's Tim Hardy Racing on Instagram, right?
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you haven't seen it, go back and look at his Instagram. But I got to ask you this question, because as I was watching this, I was wondering this question. Did you post all those pictures in real time?
Yeah.
So like you took a picture, you posted it up. So whenever you see it, whatever date that picture was posted, that's the date, that's where you were.
Yeah.
So, okay. I want to get more about the last minute. Yeah, I want to get the progression, but like I'm watching this, like, so you made a huge bunch of changes this year. You swapped in a dual clutch transmission into this car, and you moved everything. You moved the engine back, was it 4 inches?
9 inches, yeah.
9 inches. So 9 inches back, dual clutch transmission behind it. You had to cut out the transmission tunnel. You moved everything. You basically, this is now not a BMW E30. This is a Tim Hardy 1, is what this is.
Pretty much, yeah. It's still way too much E30, but yeah.
But I was looking at this going like, I think there was some point where you were just welding the transmission tunnel back together, and it was like 4 weeks before the first test, or maybe it was even 4 weeks before race week.
Yeah, I mean, this year was like pretty dire as far as like trying to get things done on like the goal, right? And a lot of it came down to I started what I thought was fairly early, and I should have probably started in like October or November of the previous year, but I started in January, mid-January. I started ordering all the stuff, and I started, taking the measurements. I started pulling the engine, and I knew I had this idea of what I wanted to do ever since I like heard of the DCT swaps, because I've always wanted to do a sequential. Last year we had, I think it was 3 transmissions blew up, 3 ZF transmissions, all different things. And I think it was just a power level and kind of at some point relying on junkyard transmissions that we got and just like testing them and seeing if they blow up or not. And it just didn't seem very reliable to me. So I looked at the other options, and the whole thing revolved around the DCT, because the ideal scenario would be a true sequential. But to do the same thing that we've done with the DCT, it would have been twice or three times the amount of money.
Sure.
Granted, there's pros and cons to both of them. The big con to ours is size and weight. It's 100 pounds heavier than a regular ZF, where like a Sadev or something is a lot lighter, but you don't have the capacity potential for power. And you can still run a lot of power through them, but you're still playing with fire, and they have to be rebuilt, and just the cost is the big one. To do paddles, unless you get like a really good deal from them, it was unattainable for me to do that. So it all started around the DCT, and then when I got lucky and I found two of them up here in Denver after looking around for a little while. I found them at just a regular, not pick and pull, but like, just any junkyard we can just go get the part. And they didn't charge more than a regular transmission for it. They must have known what it was. So I got two for, like, one had 40,000 miles, and the guy charged me like $50 more for it. So it was like $650 for that one and $600 for the other one.
Wow. Now, and are these the ones out of the 335, or is it?
Yeah. So they're one's out of a 135 and one's out of a 335. They're the same thing, the short ratio. And I intentionally wanted the short ratio because that's kind of how I've done it, where like fifth gear is a 1-to-1 ratio, and the same thing with the 7-speed. These ones, it's a 1-to-1 on 7th gear. So it worked out really well to where I just use one per gear.
What I want to go back a little bit, because like, knowing that you've run the Peak for this long, I mean, and knowing what the car is, I mean, it might seem obvious to people that like you just want to keep getting bigger and go faster every year.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to, was it 2019 when you set your fastest time?
2018, I think.
2018.
Yeah.
So your car, I mean, it's an E30. It's small. It's light. You brought in, like, I think in those first few years of running the car, you brought in a lot of carbon fiber pieces that you built yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, at this, what pieces of carbon fiber are on the car at this point that you've built?
Yeah. So we've made every piece of carbon fiber we made in our home garage. I think a lot of people, when I say garage, I don't think people understand that it's like a home garage.
Right.
Like
it's your dad's garage, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I have to make sure that that's clear, because it's not always apparent, and it makes it a lot harder to do these kinds of things at a residential garage. It's probably not legal either. I mean, it's a hobby, but
right.
The neighbors probably don't like me very much, or when I come down there. But going back to it, the very first thing we made was a there's a funny story. I could talk to you guys all day. So we made a gas tank, because we didn't have a fuel cell. So my buddy came down and we bought this like gnarly, like super thick Kevlar, and we wrapped a fuel tank with it. And he rented a vacuum pump from someplace, and we vacuum pumped down the gas tank to just not crazy, but before we went to bed, we decided to turn it up to get like a really good seal, and not really thinking about it. He kind of suggested to not do, and I said, nah, it'll be fine. And, we came out there in the morning, and the gas tank was like completely crushed in, and it was like impossible. It was like hardened and cured, super, like you had half the capacity of the gas tank. So we had to go find another gas tank, start over, and we did it without vacuum bagging that one. But so that was the first thing we made, and completely messed it up. And then after that, we made a hood out of fiberglass. And that was the only part of the car that was in fiberglass. And that was the actual hood that we had an issue with all those years later. So, but the rest of it back in 2013, that's when I decided to do the doors, the front fenders, and then the quarter panels and the trunk lid. And then we made the wing uprights, and then both elements of the wing out of carbon fiber and Kevlar and Cormat and a couple other materials.
So you've gotten really good at carbon fiber in the last
good enough
6 to 8 years.
Yeah. And then and then 2014 or 15 we made, because we used to have a splitter that wasn't carbon fiber, and so now the whole under tray, from the splitter to the under tray to the diffuser, that's all carbon. We need to probably redo the diffuser at this point. It's delaminating and all this stuff. But yeah, I mean, if you look at it closely, you can still tell that it's a wet layup. And, you know, if I had more time in a bigger shop, it'd be a lot better if we could do molds and then get proper releases, and then you can make multiple parts and even sell them. But it's just, you know, it's a whole process. We've gotten good enough at our process of doing wet layup that we can do it pretty quick. And then we know like what epoxy to use, the temperature, how to get it to cure faster, you know, how to make sure it doesn't like poke you to death. There's tricks on what you can do to make, like, just taping things down once you're done, so you don't have all these shrapnel pieces that are impossible to like sand off. It's still not very fun working with it,
No.
as far as the itch factor and all that goes.
Sure.
How you cut it and grind it and all that.
And I mean, I don't want to get into like too far into detail, but what's crazy to me is that you did all the carbon fiber work. You did it all in just a garage. Like if you've got a house with a garage, that's the garage that you're working in. And like when you're talking about wet layup, so you have the carbon fiber, which is the sheet of the carbon fiber material, but there's no resin or epoxy or anything in it. And so you're mixing that completely separately, and then you're applying it to the fiber once you've got it in the shape that you want it.
Yeah. And there's multiple ways to do it. There's like, and a lot of these processes, there's a couple different ways, but there's resin infusion, which is similar to where you would lay your part out dry on top of whatever your mold is. And then there's like a special kind of netting / tube thing that helps you pull the resin from one side of the part to the other with the vacuum bag on top of it once you pull the pressure. And that's probably the most correct way to do it, beyond pre-pregnated epoxy sheets, which are, you know, you buy them and they're in the fridge, and it has the perfect amount of resin, a little bit more than you need, put into the part. It's perfectly mixed. You're not going to have any weird spots that aren't mixed, yada yada. But it's just way more expensive to do the preg. And you would do the same thing with the pre-preg, where you put the part in, then you put a vacuum bag, you put you know, there's parts in between that to help absorb the excess epoxy out. Then you vacuum bag it down, and then you try to get it hot or put it in an autoclave if you're really baller. But or if you're like us, you just put it on the driveway and get it really hot in the sun with a sketch tent. So
yeah. and the method you're using, it sounds like, is you put the carbon fiber material over the piece that you want to replicate. So like over a door, over a hood, over a fender.
Yep.
So that the actual piece you're trying to replicate is underneath it. You lay the fabric over it, you put the resin, and then you've got something that's basically that's the shape, and then just
So it's our methods, like, it's all based on positive copy. We've done one thing out of a mold, but so the only thing that's like negative about that is you have to just figure out your gaps a little bit. Like, say when we did the doors and the fenders, you're slightly larger than the actual part, which is, if everything is slightly larger, it doesn't really matter. It just makes it just like, you know, the thickness of whatever you put on top of it, it's that much thicker. So it's, you know, it's not exactly ideal, but for doing one-offs, it's not a bad way to go. It just sucks when people like reach out to me. They're like, hey, I'm in a pinch. I need to buy a whatever. Can I buy some of your molds, or can I get a part off your thing? And, you know, some of these people would definitely be willing to pay for it, but it's I never really thought about it. I'm like, I'm doing this car. It's like, that's my hobby, you know, like, I don't think you understand. Like, I'm not like a shop. I'm doing this for fun, which it's fun sometimes, but it feels like work, but yeah.
Well, and what is the overall weight of your car as it sits right now?
So for a while, I was really proud of it. We were at 2,400 wet, so fully fueled up, fully all that jazz. And then we ended up adding, it's still pretty good. We added up 200 pounds with the DCT this year. And then, I don't know, the tunnel is heavier because I chose a thicker, I went 16 gauge when I probably could have done 18 gauge, but I was worried about strength. So it's still pretty good. 26 is not bad, fully fueled up.
That's not bad.
Not bad at all. And what's the power?
700 and 600 foot-pounds.
Okay.
Wow. And was that a constant progression for those first like few years as well? So like just like shaving the weight and building the power.
Totally, yeah. I went. It seems like everybody tends, or not everybody, but it seems like a lot of people tend to just like one year they choose to go absolutely berserk, and a lot of things go wrong, and that's what
Right.
happened in 2013 for us. Is I bit off way more than I could chew, and it was a good learning lesson because I tried to do, in a month I did that wide body that I was just talking about with the doors, and then a big brake kit that I did on my own, figuring out all the stuff, and then there was problems with that, and that's why it crashed.
Hmm.
And then we did, what else did I do that year? I added more power, bigger tires, a bunch of stuff, and that was a lesson learned of like, for one, because it rained on me and I had bigger slicks, of being able to turn the power down when needed, because that was a situation where I couldn't get any heat in the tires, and that was before they kind of forced you to run rain. So I was running bigger slicks in the rain and trying to get any heat off the tire when it's raining at the start line. In with A6s, it just wasn't happening.
Right.
And I had no way to turn the power down. So it was just like, I mean, you can modulate with your throttle, but if in the car, my car's not really like laggy, but if you go from just like no grip to just like full spinning, and there was no in between. It was just, that was the
Right.
most white knuckle ride I've ever had. I know a lot of guys complained about the weather this year and how shitty it was, but I mean, this last year was definitely 2013 was definitely like the craziest time I've ever had up there, and it was a lot to do with me doing things incorrectly and not qualifying well. So I
And so
learned a
that would have been your third year running?
second, yeah,
Second year running. Okay. So you put the car together, you had a decent result, but I mean, you're in the middle of the pack
Yeah.
or whatever with the rest of us, and you decided kind of that next year, like, all right, this is the year that I'm going to shoot for the moon,
yeah,
and then
yes.
things, and that man, that seems to be like the recipe for Pikes Peak. I mean, we've talked about it before, that it seems like there's so many people that show up once, they
Mhm.
run it, and you never see or hear from them again.
Yeah,
And it is a hard week. It's like it's one run. It's 12 miles. That's the whole race is 12 miles. And you think it's 12 miles. That's
yeah,
easy. You could run 12 miles. Well, I mean, it's elevation. Like there are people that run it. I don't know how. It doesn't seem like it should be physically possible, but they do it. But there's like that war of attrition for that whole week is just massive. And like just the exhaustion, the lack of sleep, and just the weird stuff that happens. It
Oh, yeah.
seems like as you're practicing in the morning on the mountain, and it chases people off. But then some people, you get the bug and you decide to go big,
Yeah,
but it's like it's so hard to get everything to fall into place for a myriad of reasons. I mean, mechanical certainly,
yeah,
but like this year, weather, last year, weather. I mean, you never know what you're going to get, and that just becomes such a challenge.
yeah. Yeah, and then like this year too, to add on top of the problems, is the supply chain problems.
Yeah.
That was what
Yeah.
showed me the biggest, I think. And I knew that it was going to be a problem, and it still ended up screwing me. That's part of going back to what we were talking about earlier. The biggest crux for my whole thing was I didn't have the adapter plate and the flywheel, so I couldn't actually properly bolt the engine and the transmission together until March 29th or something like that. And I had that hole cut out for months, and it was just a big gaping
Right.
thing. And I'm like, did I just ruin this car that I have, it was really well, like I didn't have to do, like the year prior, I didn't have to do anything to the car besides change those transmissions. Like, it was fast, it's reliable, like I know the car really well. And then so
Right.
after changing this car and having this big thing sitting in the middle of the car, I was just like, God, I really hope this comes together, and I hope it works out, because there was a lot of unknowns of, everybody
Right.
else the same thing. Like I have some crude tools to make sure that everything was going to work, and it did end up working, but there's still a lot of unknowns. Like when I first time I got a dyno, I was asking the guy that was in there, like, how does the vibration feel? Does it feel, normal? Does it feel any worse? Cause I got like a laser tool. I got a bunch of things to try to line things up.
Right.
But, you can be off axis a tiny bit, but I didn't want to destroy our $1,000 drive shaft or whatever it may be. There's
Right.
a lot of things barely just worked out.
Yeah.
What was the your first practice date this year was in La Junta, right?
Yeah. So the big crux, I wanted to try to do the first practice days for Pikes Peak, and I think that was the week before the 6th. So I don't know if that would be the weekend of the first. And I might have been able to get the car at least on the dyno on the first. That was when it was originally scheduled. It was the 31st of May, I believe. But me scheduling it so early in advance, I didn't realize that was Memorial Day. And they're like, oh shit, we're closed that day. So we're gonna do it the next week. And that totally boned me, because it was like I was supposed to be dynoing that day and then on the peak, that weekend or whatever. And, that was a minor heart attack, learning that news. But they were cool letting me move, because it was early enough that I found out that they let me do the Pikes Peak thing then the week after. And so we got the car dynoed on the 6th, and then we practiced for the first time on the 9th, and then that was on La Junta, and that was a pretty successful test, but it was very we did some dumb things. There's one thing we did that was so dumb, I don't even want to tell you guys, but
you don't have to, but please do.
Well, I'll tell you because I didn't do it, but I hope my dad did this. But we, sleep deprivation was already kicking in, and he ended up putting a brake pad in backwards.
Oh, yeah.
Metal on metal. And I didn't notice because it was in the rear. And we ended up I flipped it back and then just kind of bedded it. Yeah. But it was very embarrassing and very like, oh, God damn it. Did we just ruin another, whatever, $300, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. That's one of those things with it's one event. It's 1 week out of the year. You've got 51 weeks out of the 52 weeks of a year to get ready for the race.
Yep.
And the problem is you need 56.
Totally. Yeah.
I
kept telling people, they're asking me, how's it going? I was like, oh, it's pretty good. I'm trying to do, 6 months of work every month to get the thing, because it's what you have to do. I mean, there were so many days where it's just like 14-hour days, 16-hour days. And just like you can only work so long to where you're actually effective the next day, doing things.
Right. And especially long term, like day after day after day. Like how many 16-hour days can you do in a row before it's like you now have to take a week off to just get back to being a human again, and then you can actually get the brain back in line.
Yeah, I mean I got very lucky, because I set the goal that if I didn't get those 3 things done, if I didn't get 2 test days and then that, the dyno on the 6th done, and then the 9th and then the 12th, if I didn't get that done, I was going to pull out for the year, because I knew the car was that much different. And, that was what happened in 2013 is I didn't have enough track time, and I was basically driving the thing hard for the first time in qualifying, because I think we had to qualify day 1 or day 2. And I was driving through a problem that I didn't realize, that the brake, I was losing brakes. Basically, there were a couple of things contributed to it, but I was running out of pedal travel, and I thought it was a heat problem, and I thought it was something to do with my brake coolers, and ended up basically going off without being able to like fully lock it up. So it just came to a corner, and I was just like fully down on the pedal, and nothing was happening. Like car was like kind of coming to a stop, still going 40 miles an hour. So I made that decision that if I didn't get a few of those, major milestones done this year, that I was going to pull out, because there was too much money invested that year already up into that point. And I just, I really didn't want to do it, but it all kind of worked out and barely got everything done. And we didn't have any major problems besides just, a couple stupid things. And, it was a challenge, because on that first day in track day in La Junta with the DCT, the way you do it is you basically have to tune the transmission. It has to be done remotely. So we're down in La Junta, we have like a laptop strapped in the side of the car, and I have, hotspotting to that phone or to that laptop with my phone. I've got, noise canceling headphones on, and I'm driving around the track in a super loud fucking car trying to how's that? You'd have to stop every time and tell the guy, oh, it was good, or it's bad, or it's flaring in between shifts or whatever.
All right, now hold on. So you're saying that's how you tuned the DCT. So you were at La Junta.
Yeah.
You've got a laptop and your phone and a hotspot and headphones, and you're doing laps as the guy is like through the ether logged into your car trying to reflash the DCT.
Exactly. You can do it
Perfect.
on the dyno. Yeah, you can do it on the dyno, but we talked about both methods, and he prefers to do it like just on a street or on whatever.
On a track, yeah.
Yeah, because you don't have the drag back of a dyno. You don't have that momentum.
Right.
Different as far as when you're actually tuning the car. And so it worked out. It was a little bit of a struggle because the service in La Junta is not that great. It was just,
I wouldn't imagine, yeah.
I was worried about it. And, certain sections of the track we found out are better than others, because if you're really close to the airport, they have something that kind of like overrides the signal. But if you get a little bit further away, it's fine. So I try to spend more time on the backside of the track. If I would have known, I probably would have gone to Pueblo or PPIR or something, but it's just more expensive to go to those.
Sure.
Routes.
Wow. That's incredible. And I've been kind of alluding to it or trying to get there, but what I want to say is, like, so 2018.
Mm-hmm.
So you've refined this car and gotten it to the point that it was in 2018, and that was your best year. This year, I don't know if it was you or one of your sponsors that put together this video that was kind of like, I'll call it a highlight reel of what you've done, but you've had a lot of success. So it's like we've talked about kind of like the difficulty with the car and getting it ready, but you've had a lot of success once you put the package together and started running up the mountain.
Yeah.
But then, like in 2018, if that was your fastest time, what is your fastest time up the mountain?
9:59 something. So just under 10, but yeah.
And the incredible point that this video made is that you're one of only 27 people that have ever gotten into the nines.
Yeah.
And this year was the 100th running. Nobody got into the nines this year for all the obvious reasons. So that, I mean, you know that a 9:59 is a super fast time up this mountain. But I just had no context that was such a rare feat for anybody to be able to make it.
That few. I mean, honestly, Tim, that watching your video kind of brought a tear to my eye. That whole like homegrown, like I don't have money. Me and my dad do this shit in our garage.
Yeah.
This is how we do it. And yeah, to actually be one of
27
very
people.
few. Yeah.
Yeah. I was, and he asked me that question too. It was a good buddy. That was the guy who directed the Henry Ford thing, and he ended up coming back with his own product, and that they did that video. And the same thing. Yeah, it was definitely like a very emotional. The first time I watched it, it was like I had both that wave of like, oh my God, this is awesome. It's a little bit hard hearing yourself talk, you got to get over that. But it was a thrill ride just watching it. And then the back end of it was like a pump up video to get, like it just, as soon as I got done watching that, I was like, oh my God, I need to get in the car and race right now. Like that's the kind of thing I would watch that back end of that and be like, okay, this is why we're doing this thing. Cause there's so many low points when you're building the car and getting everything ready. And it's, the success takes a lot ahead of time to get there, especially when you do a lot of this stuff yourself. And, I get it, no matter what you're doing, everybody seems to go, too ambitious. My ambition level this year was probably way too high, and there's still
never don't even say that shit.
Well,
this is your passion.
Things on my list that I didn't.
So you keep doing it and you keep killing yourself because it's that 9:59 is going to fall eventually.
Oh yeah.
Right. You keep doing this shit because you love it and you want those times to drop. And I mean, it's passion.
It is. It's an addiction, really.
Yeah.
It's a good addiction.
So how surprised were you when you did the 9:59? Were you surprised when you found out that you actually got into the nines?
I was, I mean, I knew that I was going to get close because I think the year prior I was like 10:09 or something.
Yeah, it's just over 10. Yeah.
And we did the math on the, the sector times, and I never really push fully in practice days, which I probably need to start doing that a little bit more to get more comfortable with speed in the other sections. But I just kind of knew that it was going to be right there. Then when I saw the time, like, I think the biggest shock I had that it was just barely under 10, but it still counts, it's like,
Yep.
Not many people, like you said, like whatever, 25 or 27, it's,
that's crazy.
It's pretty awesome to be one of those guys, and to be one of those guys that's like, there's not many of them that are doing it out of their home garage too.
Right.
Well, and the cars, the other cars that have done that are, I mean, some of the money behind
almost factory efforts.
just
are,
yeah.
most of those cars have most of the money backing them.
Yeah.
You know, and like so to take this little homegrown E30 and to be in that same club is pretty badass.
That's awesome. And especially just figuring out all of these crazy configurations and solutions to take this chassis and develop it to that point is just, that's amazing.
It's definitely an accomplishment. It's been, it's the amount of work and like blood, sweat, and tears and just passion and, you know, crazy nights and arguments and
sure
it takes a whole lot to get there. And, you know, I think a lot of people don't realize that when they're, you know, watching the run on YouTube or whatever it is. It's just, you know, it's hard to really connect with that person or unless you go and talk to somebody at FanFest or whatever. You don't really know the backstory unless you know,
and even then a lot of the fans just don't understand that the week, what the layout of the week is. You know, like I was talking to one guy trying to schedule a meeting, like, oh, we're testing on Pikes Peak. Oh, you're like explain the race, like, okay. And so then the next week comes up, he's like, all right, so you're free now. I'm like, that was just testing. We're testing again.
Yeah.
Oh, well, okay, so the race is over. Then the next week is like, well, let's schedule a meeting. Like, no, that's actually the race week. It's like, what kind of race is this?
Both the entire week. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's definitely, it's not, I
it's
don't
not
think there's
normal.
anything. Yeah, exactly. I don't think there's anything else that I would take off 2 months of work to do, you know, like
right.
Not only lose all my money and not make any money. Like, I don't know. No.
Well, and so what I have to ask is, I mean, obviously, you know, this platform, like, I mean, it's probably your platform. Like, the BMW should rename the E30 the Tim Hardy.
Maybe.
But is it that you knew that there's still like there's potential there? There was still time that you were missing, and was it that you knew what the success of the formula that you had in 2018 was, but you knew what the deficiencies were too? Is that kind of how you planned out what you were trying to do for this year?
Yeah, I mean, so I think I briefly touched on this, but I never really fully completed the thought. But it all revolved around the DCT and just knowing that was going to be faster.
Okay.
And that it wouldn't break, hopefully, you know.
Right.
I nuked the transmission temperature this year. I have to tell you about that, but we got up to like 140 C, so it was on a cold day. So we got to rethink cooling. But basically, I went through and counted the shifts, and then I counted the time that my shifts take, and then just realized that, you know, even if I had, you know, 20% more shifts with that extra gear, and I don't even think it's that high, but it would be significantly faster because it was well over 50 upshifts and 50 downshifts. And each one of those, I think my fastest upshift was like just around a half second. And my fastest downshift was like 0.6 seconds.
Okay.
And so just doing like rough math, I've said, well, if I can save, you know, a tenth of a second, so 0.1 seconds on each one of these shifts, that saves 10 seconds right there.
Right.
And then looking at all the other things that we could do with having the DCT, we'd have a stronger drive shaft. We'd have stronger, you know, that was the weak link, is somewhere in between the transmission or from the back of the engine to the diff I knew the weak link was in there. And we found out that the weak link was the transmission itself. I was running a stock 2-piece E30 drive shaft with, you know, 650 to the wheels and slick tires, and it never broke. But so we know that held up just fine, but the transmission was the weak link. And so I knew that if I could get that stuff all sorted, that the weak link would probably become the diff or our CVs again. And I figured we're not going to get near it at 700 horsepower. Might start, you know, if we get up to like 800 horsepower, 700 horsepower, we might start worrying about what's going to break next. But basically, starting with that DCT, I knew that was going to be a time saver with that. And then I can mod everything around that and have bigger slicks in the rear. So, you know, there's less likely for just a major failure to happen. So I knew there was time in there from just that perspective, and I couldn't get the car any lighter That was a big thing that I was trying to do in the previous years, is just get the car as light as I could, just add lightness. But, beyond making the thing tube frame or like really cutting out stuff in the back, I don't think we could have got it much lighter than what it was. And it's also one of those things where it's like, when do you stop and when do you start a whole nother car? Because this year is pretty close to getting to that point of like, should I just make a tube frame thing? But on the other side of the token is that the car, even though this was the closest thing that'll probably ever come to a full rebuild on this car, it still is like, I still know it really well. There's still so much work that's gone into this car that's like, you don't really think about until you think about just even the rebuild process of all the time and effort you spent on that one little thing or whatever it is, that it would take you that much longer to get set up on a tube frame car, like how you line all the body panels up and all that. I mean, there's so much work that goes into that. And then, it also makes you think like, God, I should have bought like a Wolf or some other chassis that's purpose built for racing, and then spend all my money that I'm spending on 80s car.
Right. It's a 10-year budget spent on like with one stroke of the signature, but
totally. I mean, it's a battle I faced a lot and thought about a lot this last year, especially when it like, I thought about it so much when I started cutting into the car. Like, it's like I spent so much money on this car and I was just worried like, God, I tried to do everything I could to make sure it didn't, get out of alignment or something got tweaked when I was cutting that much out of the car, and nothing moved. But it was just like all these fears go through your head of what can happen, what's going to go wrong. And nothing really went wrong, and it all kind of worked out. And I think, I prepare and figure out a lot of things ahead of time, but still there's a lot of luck involved. And I try to ask people that are a lot smarter than I am about certain problems that I have no idea. And, you get good feedback about what you're doing or if it's in the right wheelhouse. But a lot of it came down to just like the fact that it worked and, didn't have any major issues. So this year, this year was extra hard on just the week because I normally have probably 6 guys or maybe even more. And I think it was the Thursday before race week, one of my main guys couldn't get time off from work. He thought he could, and something happened. And then the Monday of, we were doing tech inspection, another guy said, "Oh, I've got COVID." So I was down to one main guy for race week and my dad.
Oh my gosh.
It was like, it was a whole lot to ask from both of those, from my dad and that other guy, Brad, because it was just like, as soon as I found out that Skylar had COVID, it was just like, oh we're screwed. It's just like one more thing on the pile of like, how am I going to figure this situation out? And we called around and found, a couple guys to help out, but still it was definitely more stressful than it should have been for, situations like that. It's just Pikes Peak throws whatever at you and you have to be ready to do whatever.
Right.
And, that's a crew situation. There's, there's all kinds of stuff that can go wrong. So,
well, and then of course, people now would know that the weather, of course, like it was basically it was a great week, and then the weather just completely took this turn at the end. And so it's like, well, everybody made it to the top. I mean, in crazy conditions. Yeah. So, I mean, really, it's like just the fact that there was as few issues as there was is a tribute really to all the drivers in the entire race, that it stayed together for the most part, and everybody got to the top. And
that was incredibly lucky. I mean, it sucked, but it was also, like you said, it was, you looked at the weather and it was a whole week of 85-degree high,
just
and then
beautiful,
the worst
perfect weather
on Sunday, and then 85 for the next week right after. Like the next day I went up and I was like sweating. It was like super hot up in Denver. I'm like, what is this all about? This is crazy.
I tell you, that mountain has a personality. It has moods. That's the only way you can explain it. That it's just like something, it's not happy with something and it's going to take it out on this year. And apparently like just Sunday was that day, and it just fog and rain and you name it. And the next day, I'm okay.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Yeah.
But I mean, looking forward, I mean, because you now have a sense of the car is together, it's running.
Yeah.
Are you happy with it? Like, are you realizing the benefits of it?
Oh yeah. I mean, the DCT was, a big part of this thing is I went through and I watched a lot of the in-car videos from people that are faster than me. I watched Reese's videos. I watched, a slew of people's videos. Like one thing I learned from James is just to get the proper steering ratio. James Clavin World. I was just watching his hands, and when you have paddles, if you can get it to where you go through the hairpins and you're just lock to lock, that's a huge benefit because you never have to take your hands off the wheel. Like just having that control down to where I have that situation now where it's just, you just have paddles to deal with. You have one less pedal, it sounds a little lazy or whatever, but when you're in the car and you have a manual transmission and you're trying to go under 10, it's like you're in a fight trying to get to the top, like sweating like crazy by the time you get to the top. And there's so many more things to think about. You have to think about left foot braking a lot more. You still kind of have to think about, a million things, but I would get done at qualifying, or like on this scenario, it was, the weather was crazy and I got to the top and I wasn't like completely full of sweat like I normally am. So just the confidence that you get from the driver control and figuring out that, I think that is something I learned this year of trying to dial that in a little bit better. And, I've only scratched the surface on some of that because I haven't had that much seat time. So I think, there's a long list of things that I've already made. Some of them are easy and some of them aren't easy. And a lot of it revolves around just things I saw. Like I had a photographer buddy show that was shooting for us. I went in the morning on one of the middle sections, and I went first, and then James Clay went directly behind me. And you see me come through and you see a nice trail of, dust being sucked up, and yeah, it looks pretty cool. It's a really good shot. And then you see James come through and it's like a 45-foot, vortex, like perfect spirals coming off his aero. And it's just like, that was an eye-opening thing where, in theory, I would have cleared the track off even a little bit more for him because I went first, and his just aero is visually working that much better than mine. So I know there's a lot to be happy.
Somebody spent like way too damn much money on the aero on that car. I mean, it's, like little homegrown aero compared to like looking at that car. I probably spent an hour just looking at that car. Yeah. It is a piece of work. That's for sure. So
it's definitely figured out better. So, I know that I'm not going to be able to get to that level, but because it goes back to the time or money thing. But that's one thing. I've never even had the car like scanned, and I've never had it in CFD. So I would like to do that like as a base marker, and then see what can I do to improve it. And we've already talked, I've been talking to a few people, just what can I do to help, just without spending a ton of money. That's the thing, is because I can make the carbon stuff relatively inexpensive if I'm doing it myself. It's just like figuring out how to do it properly and making sure that doesn't cost a ton of money. You can spend as much or as little as you want. Just it depends on the goals, but that would be something I'd like to try to do is work on the aero a little bit more now, even though I know it works and seat of the pants, it feels good, but I know that there's more there that can give me more confidence to go quicker. And some of these higher speed corners and just being planted overall better would, it's it's easier said than done for sure. Because redoing the whole like under tray was, will be a massive challenge. Like each one of the big parts is a hard thing to make, but it's something I enjoy. It's fun making those pieces when they come out and everything works. It's like, it's a little bit stressful because when you're doing a big piece, you're working with like large swaths of carbon fiber, and it's only getting more and more expensive as time goes on. And it's easy to mess up a big part too. Yeah. But, I mean, I'm pretty darn happy with the car, really. Like it performed. That's the thing, is like I try to put as much work into the car ahead of time to make sure that it runs relatively reliable, and that everything that's changed on the car, you think about like you do one thing and it can affect 4 other things on the car, and how it can impact those things negatively. It's, you have to think a little bit like an engineer, and I'm not an engineer, but I'm just trying to,
Well,
figure
you're
it out as best
you're
I can.
learning. You're moving in that direction for sure.
I should have started in that degree
Right.
on at school for it, but
Right.
um
Well,
no,
I mean,
it's fruitful for sure when it all
Yeah.
lines up and it works, and you do well. It's definitely have that accomplishment. It takes a little while for it to soak in for me. It's more of kind of like, oh God, the week's finally done,
Sure.
like you start living it better in hindsight for sure, looking
Sure.
back at pictures and all that. I'm sure you guys are the same way. The sleep deprivation doesn't make it easy.
No. Well, and I mean, for next year, if you did nothing but work out any of the small issues with the car and just drive the car and test the car more,
Yeah.
I mean, do you think, I would guess with the big jump that you made for 2022, that if you run that exact same car with just that extra seat time, extra development and refinement, is that what you're planning for next year, or do you have something else in mind?
It depends. I'm still putting together a couple game plans. There's things that I need to, or a few things that I like have to change, but they're not like major. Just some things that are going to take a little bit of time. But definitely the car is faster. Like I found out from qualifying, and this is the thing, like we were shorthanded the whole time, and the car felt really fast, and I didn't really think too much about it to look into the logs all that hard and look into the data. But I had changed up the wastegates from 244s to 166, and somewhere along the lines of doing that, the old boost control settings, the electronic wastegate was different. So when I wasn't getting the same power when I thought I was getting full power, I wasn't. And that was something we were dealing with on the dyno. We just found a workaround. And so long story short, ended up beating our qualifying time by 4 seconds. And I was 5 PSI down on boost. So
Wow.
Instead of 19 pounds of boost or close to 20, we were about 14 pounds of boost.
Huh.
So in order to go, like it's just seat of the pants. Who knows how fast you're actually going to get with 5 more pounds of boost? That's probably another 100 horsepower. But if I can go, 4 seconds faster with less power than I've ever gone, like, the car felt really reliable.
You did something right.
So
Yeah.
I think that was a 406, and I'm guessing I could feel. So the other problem with that run is it felt really good, but the top 3/4 of that run, again, not having enough crew, not thinking about it. We actually had more crew that day because it was qualifying, and I got a couple buddies to come, but including me, but nobody remembered to put fuel in the car the entire day. With E98, it churns through fuel pretty quickly. And so I've never run out of gas on Pikes Peak until on the way down from qualifying, because it was,
Oh, wow.
I have hydromats, and it was cutting out, not badly, but definitely enough to where there was probably another half second in that run. So that would be a 405, because I think it was a low 406. And then, add that extra 100 horsepower back in. And there's other things we need to do with sway bar, because I'm getting, understeer at high speed, exit corners, and a few other things I tried to get to this year and never got to it prior to Pikes Peak. And I didn't want to start messing with it while I was on Pikes Peak and starting to get the feel for the car. But if we change up a few things like that, I think, there's definitely a few more seconds in there. So the goal would be I know there's not that many people that have gone under 4 in qualifying. So that would be a pretty big goal to get to. So we're 6 seconds away from it. And I think that's achievable with more power and more setup.
That you already have. You just get all those pieces of the puzzle to align. You're already probably there.
Yeah. And
So
I run and don't mess up, which
for comparison, like Scott went 11 seconds faster in qualifying this year and put down a 420.
Yeah.
So like we were like over the moon, the fact that Scott put down a 420 and you're 14 seconds faster than that. So I mean that is a huge accomplishment, to knock another 6 seconds off there. I think, I mean, refinement, a little more power. maybe a little more downforce.
Yeah, a little bit more cojones. I think every
Yeah,
second
yeah, right.
you go down, yeah, it's once you get closer and closer, I think a lot of people start maxing out about that 350 or in the 355 to 4 range. And
Sure.
I don't know how much more the car has, because I'm still on, stock rear semi-trailing arms on the car that are just beefed up a little bit. There's a lot that can be desired, or a lot of things that can be changed anyways, that now that we got pushed into Pikes Peak Open, it's just how much do I want to tackle and how much do I know how to tackle. So it's just tough to compete with the guys that do know how to do those things and set up,
Right.
start with a tube rim car or something that's fully set up correctly. Like I built that car specifically for time attack, and then
Okay,
when the
yeah.
rules got pulled to where the car was not turbocharged. I'm not even really sure why they.
Okay, so let me explain. This is a big thing, but people that are not like up on Pikes Peak won't know this. So
Yeah.
there was originally, or for most of the time that we've been running, there was 2 time attack classes, time attack 1 and time attack 2. Time attack 2 was basically a stock car that had a cage put in it, and somebody had told me this, I don't know where I heard this, but something, the idea behind it was a class. The idea was for manufacturers. If the manufacturer wanted to take a stock car and run it up Pikes Peak just to showcase what it could do, that's what the Time Attack 2 class was supposed to be for. Then Time Attack 1 was more open, but it was that in between, like the open class where you can kind of do anything that you want. This is still production car based. You do a lot of stuff, but it wasn't completely open. But and that was the way it ran for a long time. And then I think was it 2 years ago when they brought in they removed Time Attack 2, and then they brought in the GT4 spec class for Porsche.
Yeah.
That's when they realized, well, so now that the stock class is gone, it was something to the effect that they wanted to really make sure that the Time Attack 1 cars, were closer to production. Not just a totally stock production car, but it was closer to production. So if the car wasn't forced induction, you couldn't add forced induction and stay in that class. You were automatically booted to open or unlimited.
Yeah.
You just had to pick. And so what that meant is that there was probably like 10 of you guys in the Time Attack 1 class that had very competitive cars in this Time Attack 1 class that now got moved over to open.
Yeah.
That are competing with all these open class cars that were built like tube chassis. So when you're talking about tube chassis, that's a lot of what was in open to begin with for the longest time, because it was like, we're just going to build an open class race car, no holds barred, like these giant wings and stuff. And now with those changes, now you get moved from Time Attack, and now you're competing with those guys.
Yeah, it was definitely a little bit of a low blow. Like, it definitely didn't benefit me.
Well,
maybe it benefited
seemingly not. But Tim, you're on the podium again this year.
Yeah, it was a little bit of luck involved with that, a little bit of just crazy brazen driving, but and just the weather, and
sure. It makes the race challenging for sure, because it's like now you have a car that's not exactly, it doesn't fit in the class, and that it doesn't really fit into either class.
Yeah, and that's part of another reason that it spawned off the whole DCT and moving the engine back, because that's always something I'd wanted to do, and you couldn't have done that in Time Attack,
right?
Which that was a very hard decision as to whether or not I was going to actually do all that and move the thing back, and it worked out, but it's still, the car is probably still not. There's still more that could be done to take advantage of what you can do in Pikes Peak Open, because there's so much you can do. I mean, if you look at the rule book, and if you look at the gray lines, or the stuff that's not actually written, like, you basically can make a Pikes Peak Open car as crazy as any unlimited car you want. Like, take the Homegrown, for example. It's like, your biggest limitation is, the car has to be based off a car that just any car that's ever existed, which is whatever, most people aren't going to make a car. I mean, unless you're like Volkswagen with IDR thing, but it's easy to make the car look like whatever other car you want. And then the other big limitation is 1,800 pound minimum, which most cars are heavier than that anyways. And then the next thing is, your wing can't be wider than the width of the wide body. But that just means like, look at the Hoonicorn, the freaking fenders on the Hoonicorn are like 1.5 feet. Like you can make the car 30 feet long and then you have a 29-foot wing and then, or wide, and then you're totally fine. So it's
totally
just,
fine.
It's a little bit of like, I don't know. I think there needs to be more distinction. I would have loved Time Attack to have gone instead of what they did. I would have loved it to go more like what everybody else knows Time Attack. You look at like the Super Lap Battle or, Global Time Attack, like that is Time Attack. That's what everybody knows Time Attack as.
Right.
And then you do, Pikes Peak Open could stay what it is, or could be something in between. I don't know how many classes they really need to separate it, but right now it's like kind of, you have your Time Attack cars and then you have the unlimited things, which I consider Pikes Peak Open. It's pretty much unlimited. It's just like you have a chance, somebody has a chance of getting down to the 923 or whatever. It's a lot more obtainable than what the IDR said. So I think that's why people are entering in Pikes Peak Open, is just because it's a record thing. I don't know. It is what it is on that. I don't think they're changing the rules, not for the little guys. They're changing it for the big guys or whoever. I'm not entirely sure how a rule change comes about. They never have asked, to my knowledge, any of the competitors. So I think it's just whatever they decide in the board meeting or whatever.
That is a black box that I don't think any of the competitors are ever going to see into. Yeah.
Which it just sucks when you build a car specifically for that class and they tear it out underneath you and they don't ask you. Sorry, whatever.
Well, so you mentioned this, and I was going to ask you this, and you brought it up. So I'm going to ask: have you looked at doing anything else with the car, like Super Lap Battle, like Global Time Attack?
I would like to. The problem comes down to like the support and just the cost of the thing, because it's, being just having done Pikes Peak, say if it was 6 months from now, I'd be like, oh yeah, I could do that. But just the amount of effort it takes to get the thing out of the garage and just get it onto a trailer and get everything started. And, we run ethanol, so we clean the tank. It's just like, there's so much to it just to get the thing like going to a destination, like not even even to get to a dyno or whatever it is. That's the challenge, I think, for me, and the support. I think it probably would benefit me to do that, to get more seat time and to help the sponsorship thing, because that's a struggle, is trying to get sponsorship, and like I'm upfront about, like, it's the only race the thing does.
Right.
Other cars do that and they don't have a problem, but they have big names behind them. So
it's you have to be at the very pointy end of a class to be able to really get that kind of support, or just find that sponsor that is really keyed into what Pikes Peak is enough to participate in that way.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, it's tough because of the scheduling. And then like, I just about almost every year, just about kill myself getting to the race and getting the thing done. And then the last thing I have to do is like get it out immediately. And then before you know it, it's like, it's October, it's Halloween.
Yeah.
It's like every year it's hard to think about it. And then by then you're starting to figure out like, oh, what do you want to do on the car or whatever, because you have to do it early. And inevitably you're doing way too much on the car and procrastinating. I don't know.
So Super Lap Battle at Circuit of the Americas is in February, or this year it's going to be the beginning of March.
Next year's March.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a perfect time to go shake the car down, get it ready for Pikes Peak.
And I mean, we pretty much talked you through this, Tim. I mean, it's just like we're finding some of the small details and driving the car.
Yeah.
I mean,
I do need the seat time.
Circuit of the Americas, it's a big track. So if something goes wrong, you got a lot of runoff.
Yeah.
It's a high-speed track, so you can test the aero out.
You got plenty of time to get ready for it.
Probably break all the aero. I don't know if the car's ever gone over like 150, so I don't know if I trust my wing that much.
And it's like close to sea level versus 9, 10, 14,000 feet. That's true. Yeah, a lot more stress on the aero.
It definitely adds. It adds a whole nother dimension. Like maybe I wouldn't have luck down low. I have thought about that. Like, how would the car react down there? How would the I mean, maybe it would be fine, but you always worry about. I mean, the lowest I've ever gone down to is La Junta, which is 4,500 feet or whatever. Okay. So it's never left the state.
Have you ever driven at Pueblo or High Plains with the car?
Pueblo and Pueblo, PPIR and Lahana. I've never taken the
Okay.
thing up to High Plains just because
Okay.
it lives in the Springs, and it's just so much easier to get track days down here.
Sure.
Right.
Sure. I mean,
Um,
if it's okay at 4,000 feet, it might be okay at 2,000 feet.
maybe, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's there's things about it that make sense, but then there's things about it that are tough too. Like
Mhm.
getting the seat time is super big, but then the seat time, if it's considerably different than what Pikes Peak is, like to me, I'm sure that that's still good, but you got to start thinking about like tire choices and the cost of tires. Like the Yokos we were running this year were, a rear tire is $750 and a front's
Ouch.
$550. So it's like that
Wow.
is a huge chunk of change to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're only, I mean, I guess you could burn up a set in one day and it's fine, or just not go with the craziest slicks ever. But then you start you start running that, like, well, what do you get used to? Do you get used to the slicks? You like, I ran the rain tires, and granted, a lot of the track for Pikes Peak was on dry. So running wets on dry are terrible, but it felt like I was, even on the sections that were wet, it felt like racing in dirt this year compared to going the slicks. So, I mean, I guess, yeah, it's a tough call. I don't know. And then you wonder about the power level too, if it's good or bad to get used to the car with more power, and then you take it up to Pikes Peak and there's a little bit less power. I don't know. I've thought about it a lot, just like taking the car out, but then it always comes back to the cost of getting the thing out there, and
Right. Cost of consumables, cost of travel.
Yeah, barrel ethanol and all that jazz. And I think the bigger one really is the support network. I don't know if I can definitely convince most of the time I can convince these guys to come out and take a week out of their schedule, because all of my guys are all volunteer. I don't pay anybody to come out. They all do it for, supposedly it's fun for them, but
right.
when you get up at 2 a.m. and you're
right,
sleep deprived beyond no means, you got 14 cups of coffee in you, but so trying to convince those guys to come out and help again, like, we've kind of talked about it and it kind of never ends up happening. I think what I'd like to do, what I tried to do last year for him, because I knew I was going to tear the car down, I knew I was going to do this big rebuild process. I wanted to get everybody in the car and let them all drive it around, and it's like, yeah, we blow up another transmission, who cares, whatever,
right.
Today, like, let everybody take it out. And I got way too busy in the time I wanted to do it in September, and it just never ended up happening, unfortunately. But that would probably be a good thing to do, because then I could coerce them to actually come out, and then I help while they're there, and then we're just using used tires or whatever it is. It still would be expensive, but be a lot easier to do it if I had the help. And
it's a valid point, especially like, I mean, it's easy even talking about it and starting to think about it, to forget that you're just a guy that has a car. You're not a team. You don't have this infrastructure.
Yeah.
We ran into we went to Super Lap Battle this year for the first time, and that was the first time. I mean, we've done rallies with the rally car that were distant.
Yeah.
But it's so close to a stock car, things break. There's nothing that you're really going to be scrambling to try and find.
Sure.
There's no real big curveballs for the most part.
Yeah.
With that, if you run into an issue, but like our Pikes Peak car is different enough that there are some curveballs, and we were, 17 hours away from any shop, and we were just like, we didn't have a lot of the stuff that we would have needed if we wanted to, like, we tear down the engine and replace the head gaskets. We didn't have an engine hoist. We didn't have an engine stand. Maybe could have found them, but just didn't have like so many of the little things that you're used to when you're working at your shop. And it's like, it's for privateer traveling that far from your home base. I mean, that can be a really big deal.
Yeah. And not having that's the thing that, like, I feel like I'm very fortunate from having a place to work out of the Springs, and we're right at the base of the mountain. We're right off like 21st and 24, and that makes it significantly easier. This year we actually Winslow helped us out, so we were actually able to get on a lift for the first time. Like, that was a huge benefit.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oil change on a lift, like I've had it on a lift a couple times for like alignments and stuff, but I mean, you don't realize what you're missing, and everybody says it and it, but like trying to come down from peak week, and you're working on jack stands and you're working on your back, it's a lot easier to have the support network. And like you said, if you're out and about and you don't have any of that, that's just stuff I take for granted of, like all the stuff that's in the shop and all the backup parts and stuff. I'd have to take everything with me, because my car is like, there is a lot of stuff that's from Home Depot and the junkyard and stuff like that, but it's like there's a whole lot of stuff that's completely fabricated that I don't have two of. So it's bring all the welders, and it'd be a whole process. Or you show up and you hope nothing breaks, and
or you show up and you don't break anything.
Well,
that's the secret that everybody forgets.
If you show up with the thing you don't need, that's the thing that's going to break. It's like showing up without a raincoat and then it rains. That's how it works.
Oh yeah, that's exactly how it works. Murphy is a big fan of racing. That's for sure.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, man. Well, Tim, we've actually gone on. I just was looking at the time, and we have taken up a good chunk of your evening. So I definitely want to say thank you very much for making the time, for coming on to talk to us. Really appreciate that. Just as we're winding down here, Scotty, did you have any more questions for Tim?
No, I just want to say congratulations on your podium this year. It's a beautiful drive, and given what everybody had to deal with, it was a beautiful drive.
Thank you. Yeah.
And just for everything you've been able to accomplish with this car that you've basically completely redesigned all on your own, and just you are the definition of grassroots motorsports, and it's so cool to see the progression, and it's awesome, and I cannot wait to see what the next chapter is going to be.
Yeah, hopefully it just keeps getting faster and faster, or I can.
Yes. Or I'm going to say for this year, you just drive it more.
Yeah, that's a big one too, for sure.
Take the big projects away and just drive the thing. Enjoy it.
If I start them like right now and then get them done by like January, and then I can just, whenever I want to drive the car, I can. Yeah.
There you go.
That's the dream.
It'll never happen.
Never happen. Nope.
I'd be better off getting struck by lightning.
It's I wouldn't try that. It's actually pretty cloudy here, so that might actually happen if you run out right now.
Yeah.
So, man. Well, and so Tim, just we've kind of alluded to it, but like, where can people go to see like Tim Hardy Racing on Instagram, to see what you've done, to follow you? Where else can they find you and see what you're up to?
There's I'm trying to put stuff out on YouTube too. There's also Tim Hardy Racing. I put almost every one of the like in-car race runs are on there. Some of the qualifying. I did a couple like random build videos too, which, since we were talking about the build of the car, it might be good to go through that. I do want to try to do one more that actually kind of shows off like the final product of the car, because I had one that was like halfway through the finished build, and I'm sure people are like kind of eager to see what kind of take some of the stuff off to where you can see some of it versus just the outside of the car. But that's a good resource, and that's pretty much it. Just Instagram and YouTube. So
I will put links in the description to all of it.
Good enough.
Yeah. Well, Tim, thanks again so much for the time. Really looking forward to see what this year and I guess next year holds for you. Hopefully we'll maybe see out there driving the car more. I want to see what this thing will do. I would love to know what your High Plains lap time is. Yeah. I'll take a Pueblo lap time, but like for us, for some reason, probably because it's a little bit closer, High Plains is kind of our measuring stick.
Yeah. So. I should. We'll see if I ever get the car up there. It's just like that much further away. Even though I go to La Junta, the reason I go to La Junta is just it's such a cheap deal to go out there, and you can a lot of times go by yourself, so I don't have to worry about anybody running into me or me running into somebody else. So
yeah,
right.
Well, very cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you again, Tim. Appreciate it, and thanks everybody for listening. And until next time, as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. Once again, we'd like to let you know that your support is what makes this show possible. Be sure to check out our online store at flatirons.com for any of your aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts needs. And as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.